Morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us here today in the second session of the Stories for Change Festival. I'm very excited to have you all here. While we wait for our panelists and participants to get ready, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. If you could put your name, your organization, and where you're dialing in from in the chat, that would be wonderful. So it's great, and I see a huge geographic diversity from the various participants in the chat. And so thank you again for joining us today. I'm delighted and humbled to host an extremely important conversation about the role of community resources in claiming and defending rights. My name is Dina Zayed, and I'm a participatory action researcher and practitioner, a lifelong advocate, analyst, and strategist invested in understanding and disrupting the power relations and the political structures that shape social justice realities and determine the agency of ordinary people and their ability to manifest their own futures. It's great to see on the screen some familiar names of some friends in the field, as well as new participants that I haven't had the personal privilege of meeting yet. And I would say that most of us today are gathered aware of the crises of our time, and especially for the human rights community. Only a few days ago, the United Nations slashed its budget, and a disproportionate share of those cuts has fallen on the rights pillar. Indeed, we're also starting off a new year with what feels like an extended and cyclical confrontation of loss. It takes only a few minutes of switching on the news to comprehend the gravity of the current moment of systemic and structural transformation redefining this century. War trumpets and budgets are louder than any point in most of our own lifetimes, and the audacity of it all is very hard to ignore. For many of us working at the intersections of the development, humanitarian, and the rights sector, the contrast between continuously rising defense budgets and the shrinking of support to civil society and to any work that openly or at times even tacitly commits to addressing the root and structural causes of injustice is quite easy to observe. Now, we know, and most of us here would be very familiar with the reality that overseas development assistance is projected to plummet by $62 billion annually this year. Human rights funding is conservatively expected to drop by 31%, with the share of support to human rights defenders already less than 0.10% of overall aid budgets. Last year, when the world's largest aid agency was abruptly dismantled, few international organizations were unaffected. This aid shakeup has hit some ecosystems harder than others, and the UN's own High Commissioner for Human Rights pleased that we are in survival mode, with his agency alone noting that their free and equal campaign content in 2025 had 34 million fewer viewers than a year earlier, all while the agency lost 75% of its budget for critical monitoring and advocacy. Now, all of this is happening in a moment where global freedoms have declined for the 19th consecutive year, and just last year, 60 more countries saw deteriorating conditions for civil liberties. For the first time in many decades, we are at a point where more countries have transitioned to autocracy than to democracy. In almost every corner of the world, excessive bureaucratic measures, the weaponization of funding, especially foreign funding, increased surveillance, and the use of arbitrary repression tactics leave little room for doubt as to what it is that we're looking at. The political lurch of institutionalizing repression is on plain display in most countries and in our multilateral and global systems. There's open and rising hostility, making work on everything and anything from child digital safety to domestic violence to HIV response to the right to work to social security, to accessibility for persons with disability, or anything that uses the language of rights, that much more difficult. It's also in this climate that we have to ask ourselves what it is that we mean when we say rights or human rights. When do those rights get coded as political? And what makes the pursuit of that a threat, and on whose terms? So with this emerging picture, how also do we reckon with our place in this crossroads? What is our role in observing where the winds of change are blowing and fanning that change to make sure that the wind blows in the direction of equitable, transformative, and just possibilities and futures? How do we find hope, knowing fully that hope, like imagination, is a muscle we must learn to exercise? Can we really practice that muscle if our attention is constantly and perpetually on what is breaking and crumbling before our eyes? Now, what if we were to carefully examine the evidence that might already in practice tell us a different story? For all these reasons, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce today's session as ultimately a conversation about just that, and an opportunity for us to ask perhaps different questions on what is working beyond the spotlight. Today's festival marks the end of Giving for Change, a 5-year, 8-country program backed by the Dutch government to support community philanthropy as theory and practice, as a strategy to build and share power and shift power. Some of the work that was discussed today was supported through this program and some has not, but we hope that this dialogue more widely serves as an inspiration and a celebration of practices and approaches that already exist, even if quietly or at the margins. Now, we have an A-list panel to help us get to grips with these important and complicated issues. But before I introduce them, I also wanted to offer some housekeeping notes. As you have already seen in the chat, we have simultaneous interpretation in Arabic, French, and Portuguese. You can select the channel of your choice. We will be screening a number of films today, and we encourage everyone to be in full screen mode for better viewing. I should note that the subtitles are only in English, but translators will be able to translate those for you. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, please use the Q&A icon to type it in, and either they or our webinar team will answer directly. I will attempt to run a tight ship with this 2-hour program, but fair warning, we might go over by 5 or 10 minutes. And now I want to take this as an opportunity to also say thank you to everyone and for joining us online, for the generosity of your time and presence, and for holding a collective space where we can ask ourselves some difficult questions ultimately on how do we move away from writing checks to building systems, and how can those systems expand the scope for dignified lives? Now, joining us to address these questions, I'm delighted to welcome such a great panel. I'm not sure if Martin is online now. I'm just double checking. Thank you. So we were supposed to be joined by Gerald Kanyaka of TLC, of the Twanaho Listeners Club. But unfortunately, due to the situation in Uganda with the elections and perhaps signifying the significance of this session, he may not be able to join our session as the internet has been cut off in Uganda. However, we also have welcoming Jonathan Azevedo, an activist committed to social justice and the executive director of Rede Como in Brazil. I'm also delighted to welcome Michael Vincent Mercado, or Mike, who is a development professional dedicated to shifting power to communities on the front lines of disasters. He leads the Voice and Insights Lab at the Center for Disaster Preparedness Foundation and is the manager of the Abbot Kamai Foundation Solidarity Fund. Mike was a 2024 Shift the Power Fellow. I'm very happy to also introduce Kedi Waziri, an African writer, dreamer, researcher, polycraftual fiber artist, and grassroots community organizer at Transqueer Fund and Collective. They are a student of radical social movements. Their work lives at the intersection of social justice, art, and feminist politics, and is an emerging voice on histories of marginalization, identity, citizenship, and digital justice. Last but not least, Martin McQuan, who is a veteran activist from Gujarat, India, and is the founder of the Navasarine Trust, the Dalit Shakti Kendra, and the Dalit Foundation. His work on human rights has focused on eliminating the practice of untouchability and caste-based discrimination. Now, I'm really excited about this panel discussion, which we will turn to shortly, but I wanted to first offer the audience a run of the show and a summary of what to expect today. In part one of today's session, we will screen an extract of our video essay, Our Rights, Our Resources, and then we will turn to this great panel for a discussion. We will then have a wonderful opportunity to hear a live spoken word performance from Nigerian storyteller Wana Udubang. In part two of the session, we'll watch a few short trailers of some of the films made by Giving for Change partners from Ethiopia, Palestine, and Brazil. And then we will have two spotlights focused on community philanthropy in Mozambique and Brazil. And we'll also show some trailers of the films created about work in those countries. Now, a very quick note to say that all Giving for Change partners have spent the last 6 months creating and producing short documentaries showcasing the importance of community philanthropy from their contexts. We have a total of 9 films, in addition to 3 thematic films produced by the Global Fund for Community Foundations. Today, we are only showing trailers and extracts, but the full films are premiering on the festival website, and we absolutely encourage you to visit the website after this session to watch these great films. I also wanted to mention that this is the second session of the day, and the first focused on the range and diversity of community philanthropy stories from around the world, addressing the challenges and opportunities ahead of us in these challenging times. I believe you can watch the recording of that session later at your own leisure. Now, I'll ask the team to play Our Rights, Our Resources and the overlooked power of community philanthropy and defending rights, and then we'll jump right into it with the panel discussion.
There is a widely held view in the international development mainstream that while local communities will raise money to build a classroom or pay medical bills, they won't do the same for human rights or social justice. There are problems with this narrative. It simply isn't true. Communities all over the world have long been mobilizing local resources to claim their rights. But somehow, they are not seen. Look at Western Uganda. Over the years, communities have been harmed by large international development programs. One of such aimed to conserve fish stocks and promote sustainable livelihoods in the Lake Edward and Lake Albert region. But fishing communities faced terrible hardship from strict restrictions, and the promise of alternative livelihoods never came. Instead, enforcement was carried out by a quasi-military force. Boats were destroyed, people were arrested, and several people died. Here was a well-intentioned international development project that failed to engage meaningfully with or protect the communities it was intended to help. And when it came to taking up the cause of the communities, it wasn't an international human rights organization leading the way. It was a local group called the Twe Waneho Listeners Club, also known as TLC. TLC started in 2006 as a radio talk show called Twe Waneho, which means let's struggle for ourselves. Over time, it evolved into a locally rooted rights and justice champion. Now it uses community philanthropy to fight for rights. Local resources pay for gathering evidence, impact surveys, and legal fees. The communities took their claims to court and achieved recompense in every case. This success has had a lasting effect in the region. Impacted communities have become highly engaged and politically active. TLC's approach of evidence and negotiation is being adopted in other parts of Uganda. Around the world, claiming rights from the bottom up is the norm rather than the exception. The Trans Queer Fund and Collective in Kenya have taken a bold decision on foreign funding. They don't accept donations. Most donors don't get the realities of their work or the communities they serve. The Transqueer Fund reject the way foreign donors work, their reporting procedures, the project-based funding, and their slowness to act. Often they need to move quickly to help someone in a precarious situation. Foreign donors may also require them to be legally registered. In a country that criminalizes queer and trans bodies, that is impossible. Transqueer Fund fosters mutual aid within their community. Those who are funded go on to support others. Solidarity grows from the grassroots outward.
Wonderful. Every time I watch this movie, I am reminded of a quote from Norma Wong in When No Thing Works. She tells us we know the story of collapse, or at least it is vivid in our imagination. We have much less imagination of the time place on the other side. What we cannot imagine is more difficult to create, and what cannot be created cannot become so. But something about watching this film makes me feel like perhaps there's always been a parallel timeline, not just one that comes after, but one that has always coexisted and has sometimes worked silently and away from the mainstream. So my first opening question to each of the panelists is to hear some initial reflections and for them to introduce their work and perhaps address this open-ended question of what if the answers to our crisis of imagination already lies within us? And I'd like to invite Jonathan to start.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So happy to be here with you today. It's my first event of the year. I just came back from vacations, and it's a pleasure for me to be for this event to be the first one. I think it's very meaningful for me as a person. It's very meaningful for us as Comoa as well to be here with you all. So Comoa is a network of independent grant-making organizations. We are from Brazil. We have currently 18 members. One of them you listen from today is Cezi, one of our founding members. And our work is to foster this community and social justice philanthropy that we see in Brazil. There are strengthening civil society, strengthening the claim for rights, strengthening our democracy. And when you brought up this question, Dina, about imagination, I thought about my vacations actually, because one of the things that I did during my break was to watch movies from Studio Ghibli. I'm a huge fan of Studio Ghibli. I don't know if many of you know it, but it's a Japanese animation studio led by Hayao Miyazaki, the director. And I watched some of the movies that I hadn't had the chance to watch before. And one of them that I watched was Pompoko, which is not by Miyazaki himself. It's by Takahata, another director from the Studio Ghibli. And whenever I watch the Ghibli movies, I always think of community philanthropy in a way. And I think Pompoko had a really good representation of it. Pompoko is the Raccoon War in English, the title of the movie, if I'm not mistaken. And it shows a community of raccoons, of tanukis, which are magical creatures in Japanese mythology, that ended up fighting against the development projects that are impacting their communities. So it's a very interesting movie that shows the dynamics of a community, the dynamics that we see every day in our work, how communities have their assets, how communities have their knowledge, how communities have their networks, and especially how communities are fighting for their rights. And one of the weapons that those tanukis use to fight against the development projects is imagination. So one of the powers, one of the assets, is to transform into other creatures, magical creatures, and when they get together, those creatures, those magical powers, they get even stronger, even stronger. So So whenever I watch, when I saw Pompoko, I thought of community philanthropy, I thought about work. I thought that, yes, imagination is what moves us forward and what makes the world possible. So I think community philanthropy is all about imagination. It's what keeps our imagination alive. And I know that this festival is all about that as well. So glad to join you here today. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you so much. And I love this. I love both this analogy and a reminder for those of you that might be interested in the power of rest, that we often think of just physical rest, but there's so much more to say about spiritual, creative, mental, and other forms of rest. There are 9 different kinds, so I'm told. And so you're giving us an example, live example of what the power of creative rest and its necessity. I'd like to move over to Mike to tell us a little bit about your experience in CBP in the Philippines.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike. I'm from the Philippines, and I'm from the Center for Disaster Preparedness Foundation. So, really, the context of the Philippines is one that is really prone to disasters. So, climate change exacerbates most of the hazards that come to this country. So, this disasters really makes development difficult in most of our communities because it's hard to create economic development if your household have to rebuild homes and livelihoods every time a disaster strikes. So our organization really works with communities in order to help them establish early warning systems and have disaster preparedness mechanisms on the household level and community level. And when GFCF found us and we met with GFCF in 2021, there was a resonance in the way that we work because in our community-based disaster risk reduction management, we usually talk about community knowledge, community assets, and these are the things that we actually focus on and highlight their capacities when we discuss their plans, disaster risk reduction and management plans. And so community philanthropy became this term that that was introduced to us, but is actually already living, a lived experience and a living tradition, practice in the Philippines, in the Philippine society, which is very ancient as well. We have a lot of words, beautiful words in local languages that are equivalent to the same concept of community philanthropy. We have bayanihan, we have pagkakaloob, we have binadang in different northern languages, so much more. So these speaks of the very nature of Philippine communities, right? It is very group think kind of relationships among group is very important because in this society, if the community could not respond to disasters, I get it. It is not possible to bounce back, right? So that has been how the communities in the Philippines operate for so long. But I think the difficulty that is happening right now also is because most of the systems that were put in place, and we're going to talk now about colonization and all that, but most of the political system and educational system that was put in place, that was set up, is not in tune with the way that we relate to each other, which is that of based on trust, based on relationship. And I think we're going to talk so much more about this, but just to give you that sort of perspective that in the Philippines, in our society, community philanthropy is alive, thriving, and we're going back to that, to our roots. And I think that is very important to talk about when we talk about development in our context.
Thank you so much, and excellent reminder as well, language on that often gets forgotten in development conversation. I'm going to come to you, Kedi, and turning to your interdisciplinary as well as your cross-continental perspective to weigh in on this conversation.
Thank you, Dina. I'm Kedi, as Dina has mentioned before. I organize with Trans Queer Fund. We're based here in Nairobi, and we are a mutual aid collective. that resources most of our funding, I would say, from the community. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize my video wasn't on. Sorry, guys. Can you see me? Yes? Okay, great. Okay, great. Yeah, so the funding that we operate in mostly comes from our communities, and that's intentional because it's a mutual aid collective. And we also recognize that all funding is political, whether it comes from our communities or people who support us or allies or other feminist movements in different countries around the world. But it doesn't mean that the work that we do is depoliticized in any way. In fact, it means that we are reclaiming the politics around funding, whether whether we're talking about decentering how the aid movement is responding to capitalist oppression, or we're also affirming that people who are often deemed powerless can actually mobilize their own resources to build power and also to speak to narrative power, because when you have your own resources, you can do things that are not tied down by agendas or agendas that don't really serve the communities that we're in. Um, and also, I just wanted to make a note to say that mutual aid is not something new that is in our communities, but it did become a bit more magnified when COVID happened because, a lot of systems collapsed and everything. And now we've broadened our understanding of helping each other such that, if a community somewhere will focus on educating the young people in that community, or another community will focus on building roads. It's also a way of pushing back on like regressive political narratives about certain people, who is fundable, who is not fundable, who is worthy of receiving foreign aid, what they should look like, what they shouldn't look like, and just pushing on narratives like that while we continue building political education power and building solidarity transnationally as well in the region has really helped push back against dominant narratives that kind of paint people in our region in a certain light. So it goes beyond self-resourcing. We're also doing a lot of political work to shift narrative. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that is also an excellent reminder, especially the framing of all funding being political. I know we were supposed to be joined by Martin, but we might be having some technical difficulties. So I'd like to come back to Jonathan with sort of building and bridging on the 2 points that we've already heard about the power of language. Both Mike and Kitty have sort of spoken about the words that we use to describe how we build voice, community, and agency. And I wanted to come back to you in the example from Brazil and what it means for us to resource social change, and how funders, even when they might not be directly defining themselves as funders or directly defining themselves as direct community members, can act as interlocutors for change and not just intermediaries. Could you share a little bit further about the work of the network and how community philanthropy can help connect the dots?
Yes, thank you, Dina. And before addressing your question, I'll take a quick step back because as we begin this year with so many sad news, like I said, being here with you all is very meaningful for me, meaningful for us as Comoa, because I think meetings like this are all about hope, all about dreaming, and all about celebration as well. And I think 2025 was a year in which Comoa also had lots to celebrate, as many of our members were reaching their 5th, 10th, 20th, 25th, and 50th anniversary marks. It was also the year that Comoa, with partners like Aliança Fondos del Sur, the Network of Community Funds of the Amazon, and the Shift the Power movement, launched the Global South House, this physical and symbolic space that brought together 40 social environmental justice funds from the Global South at COP30 in Belém, a city that was so vibrant and so alive with the active engagement of civil society actors and movements all over the world discussing climate, the climate change, the climate dilemma that we're facing now. So for me, reaching those milestones goes far beyond the individual stories of our member funds and the networks, right? So it's about the decades-long trajectory of social environmental justice philanthropy, a philanthropy that is rooted in communities, that exists not just here in Brazil, but also across the Global South. And we've seen some cases here in the panel already on how that works. And it's a history that highlights the creativity, the audacity, the resistance, and the resilience of civil society. So the funds and grant-making organizations that are part of Comoa, they were born out of the movements themselves, not just as a response to this funding and political ecosystems that you described so well in your intro, that neglect our struggles and initiatives, because we know that this funding crisis is happening now, but it's not the first time that the traditional funding systems let us down. But those funds, those grant-making organizations, they are most of all a strategy. They are political actors and forces that weave connections, that foster the autonomy of civil society groups, that reach places no traditional funders are able to reach, that fund what no traditional funders are willing to fund, and that belong and truly listen to the territories. And I think that addresses already one of the questions that we received here on the chat on what makes those funding mechanisms stay in the community and go way beyond one donations or just for a period of time. And it's for this reason, Dina, that when we hear certain actors stating that our member organizations are intermediaries, is a clear proof that they don't understand what we do, that they lack the vision, that they don't acknowledge the history of those funds and of the movements. And they just simply don't get it, or they just don't want to understand the power that manifests in those funding mechanisms and how community philanthropy works in so many shapes and forms. And our funds are one of those manifestations. For me, it's a work of art. And that's also why at Comoa, we use philanthropy in plural most of the times, community philanthropy, social justice philanthropies, because we know it's very diverse. So actual intermediary organizations, they are not able to do what our members do. Of course, we know that the journey is not easy. Having such a diverse group of organizations in our network comes with some challenges as well. So how can we strengthen the sense of community amongst our members? How to create and foster our collective voice and strengthen our our joint advocacy efforts? How to deal with all the distractions that traditional system imposes on our member organizations? And those challenges, among others, also persist when we join other networks and alliances, such as the Giving for Change Alliance. It's a lot of challenges to put together so many countries, so many organizations from different parts of the world, but we know that it's worth it. And to quote Ghibli again, like I said, I'm a huge fan. Sometimes you need to fight for the things that are worth fighting for. And we know that collective organizing, that putting organizations from the Global South together, this is worth fighting for. And I think this is the only way out of this world that this situation that we're facing at the moment. And community philanthropies, in plural, show us some pathways. They show us that we can still dream, that we can still hope. And that's why I truly believe in the work of the member organizations of Comoa and many of the organizations that we're seeing here at this festival. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this is also another excellent reminder on the assumptions about the histories of these community philanthropies. And I really appreciate your point on the pluralism of this approach and your pushback against language of intermediaries and or when the resources are coming from communities, who gets to label them that. And so sticking kind of to this theme of language, I wanted to come back to Mike and to say that now you are a 2024 fellow and you've been involved with the Giving for Change program, which, as you've already shared, included organizations working together to challenge traditional models of international development aid and to transform and shift power towards local actors. Now, the core focus of the Giving for Change program was to introduce, test, and strengthen community philanthropy and other forms of local resource mobilization and asset-based approaches. But something quite important that keeps coming up here is not only have these turbulent shocks to the international development sector shown us that there are risks to over-relying on external funding, they've also highlighted that funding this crisis is not the same for everyone, and it was not birthed yesterday. And it's shown us also that local buy-in, ownership, and grounding the work is key to its effectiveness. Now, you started talking about this already in your work with extreme fragility and in context of disaster and working on the climate crisis. What lessons have you learned on the connections between building political power, movements, and self-resourcing? And what does that tell us more broadly about climate resilience and navigating the climate crisis?
All right. That question is very important to us because we've been really improving our praxis the past years, especially ever since we've took on the role of providing grants to more grassroots community-based organizations. So it really is a question of community ownership, and a lot of that entails not just merely training them, but really empowering them. And what I mean by that is when before we used to just consult or like involve community members to participate in our community risk assessments, community plannings. I think when we came to know and we realized that community philanthropy is already present in all of the communities that we work with, it became apparent and obvious to us that we must also train them how to sort of negotiate with external actors and connect them to those who have more resources and knowledge. So decision making for us is very important, and that is maybe even the goal of working with communities and being in relationship with them, is really making sure that their priorities, they're the ones who say yes or no, not the external actors are the ones who are being followed in whatever that they do. So whatever they achieve must be in service of their community plans. First and foremost, all of us as external to the communities must be in service of their community plans, their development agenda, whatever that means for them. And that may mean different to all of us because we have different views of development, but we must be in recognition or cognizant of their idea of development for them. Ownership also means that they could talk to or approach those who are helpful or in support of whatever plans they need to achieve. And that takes a lot of trust, that takes a lot of relationship building, and it takes time. So long-term support and providing more relational, more equitable partnership with them proved to us that it's important to pursue those interventions, those relationships, rather than actually the money. So we started to recognize that connecting them and really establishing healthy relationships between them, the community, and local government unit. Sorry, my cat is also wanting to be in the webinar. And other actors such as private sector, universities, where knowledge hubs are usually based. It is really important that they have trust and relationship with all these actors, because communities couldn't do it alone, right? They have assets, yes, but they can unlock the power that they have if they are working with all of society. And we've been hearing that a lot the past years. And we keep saying that community-led is the way to go. But I think that the real measure of that is when communities could discern the actions that they need to do, what resources they need to have to achieve the actions that and goals that they wanted to achieve, and without having to consult external actors. So we recognize also that we are an NGO, and community organizing is important. So that's why we mostly work with grassroots organizations who have long-standing relationship with people in the community. And we learned that tools are not enough. We may have established early warning systems, we may have provided tools, but if the relationships, if the trust and the roles are not clear to them, then the systems that we set up is not usable, especially in terms of crisis, in times of stress. Relationships is still sort of the operating system that this entire relationship must be built upon.
That's an absolutely beautiful quote. Relationships are the basis of the operating system. And I feel like we need to write that in bold and put it up on top of our desks everywhere. I want to come to Kitty again and to sort of stick on this theme, relationships, and also while we talk about how we understand traditional funder appetite for risk. I'm in a context where we know that less than 1% of international development funding reaches feminist movements directly, and that Black-led women's organizations globally receive just 0.1% of that figure. What lessons can you share? And you've talked a little bit about this already in terms of how we understand the politics of funding, on how we can do the work that champions the intersection between gender rights and identity in a way that challenges not just the flow of this funding logic, but also the grammar, to use your earlier reference, in a manner that shifts how we think of voice, ownership, power, and agency.
Okay, thank you for this question. It's also, I'll just take it back to political clarity, because a lot of the times global aid will breadcrumb movements, will give enough just to keep movements operational, but not really to sustain autonomy and to build movements for the long run, or rather to build movements in a way, even when external aid collapses, the movements can keep doing the work that they need to do to transform their communities. So for us, for example, at Trans and Queer Fund, we established political clarity at the beginning of the fund just because we understood the ecosystem within which we operate in the region. Because there's so many global NGOs that just pump money into the region without really understanding the exact work that needs to be done, because they have their own agendas, they have their own reports that they must write back to their governments and to other global funding. So they don't really come in as partners, they come in as people who are kind of like dangling something above the heads of grassroots organizers. So just having a political clarity where we say whatever funding that we are going to get, we're going to localize it and we're going to make it people owned and community owned, such that yes, majority of our resources, both monetary and non-monetary, come from the communities that we exist in and that we serve. Even when we get funding from outside, either from transnational allies or global allies, we also make it our own. We don't say this money has come from X person or X organization, therefore it's going to do X things. We integrate it into the ways in which we are already working as extra support, and even looking at it as reparations kind of shifts the narrative of charity, which is still built on capitalists having people who have something and people who don't, but viewing it as reparations also just enables the work to continue and to flow. And even in the film, they touched a bit on how we do our accountability. So the accountability is also very political, because the first site of accountability is our communities. So even if we have an external partner who has given a gift to TQF or some sort of funding, we make them understand that our first site of accountability is to our communities. Even just to echo what Mike said on trust, because we also build a lot of our movement power on trust. And Also, love is a currency in the work that we do. Love and care and kindness and empathy and joy. We create sites of being joyful together as well as grieving together. Some of the images in the film are from like picnics that we've had, walks in the forest, also just being in touch with nature, because a lot of the ways in which the funding ecosystem works, it makes people who are receiving the funding work so much. There's a lot of bureaucracy that goes into like keeping up with the program, making sure that the proposal guidelines are followed, reporting, which kind of extracts people from communing with nature, which is also a huge part of just like survival as a human being, especially in this period of collapse. And like you said, like funding to feminist movements is already so low, and even lower when you look at global South queer movements, and it's only going to get lower. So the people who've been in burnout for the last couple of decades because of all the bureaucratic processes that they do to receive breadcrumbs are going to be entrenched in even more burnout. And we just try to take these lessons even as we grow. With our political clarity is not set in stone. It's something that is growing. We're also trying to figure out where do we belong, because here it's the question of belonging also is a bit political because queerness is criminalized. Um, yeah, so just such political groundings also keep us in check on who is our allies, who can we receive support from and why, and what does this support mean in the broader term, and will we be okay if there's a vacuum in this kind of support? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You've opened up so many threads of conversation that part of me is very sad that the panel time that we have left is not tremendous and long. I'd like to talk for at least another hour. But on this note, and you've really struck a chord with this contrast between breadcrumbs versus abundance, a language of abundance, a language of love and care and belonging. And I initially wanted to hear from Martin about this because he has so much extensive experience in the Indian context. But as we mentioned, we think there's been some technical difficulties. So I'll ask this question to everyone on the panel because you must all have this experience as well. While working on highly sensitive and difficult issues that are about reclaiming rights in the context of tremendous power asymmetry, whether that's in development interventions or on engaging with these sensitive issues of citizenship and identity and belonging. And sometimes those external resources delegitimize already very sensitive work. We've seen foreign agent laws in the vast majority of the world's countries, in fact, where simply by accessing funding from abroad, organizations open themselves up to scrutiny, or they become directly or indirectly implicated in accusations of working as foreign agents on foreign agendas. So I would love to hear in a few words from each of you, maybe about minute and a half each, how local resourcing of rights work is actually a sustainability strategy in a moment where foreign funding subjects rights defenders to accusations and delegitimization. And to use the example that Kedi has already spoken about, this where is the constituency of accountability held with communities or with funders, and where is the role of the state and let's call it the policing and security infrastructure coming into play with that? Do you want me to pick on someone to start? All right, I am going to suggest Mike kicks us off.
All right. So in our context, so whenever there is a disaster, we need to bring back the dignity of people, right? And you do that by providing life-saving relief items, or in some cases, bringing back their livelihood or their homes. So therefore, local mechanisms for funding must be put in place, and you can only do that if you've been working with the community for so long. So access to resources is important without the need for long chains of command from government or like for external actors, which is unfortunately some of those things are happening right now, especially with the different approaches that are being introduced to us. Things like anticipatory action, where the trigger needs to be, if anyone is familiar, it has to be triggered by a threshold which is set by the community, but the resources will come from external. So that so we're working with other organizations in order to sort of contextualize that and make sure that it's also based on the agreements within the community. So it is important for us to make sure that the community are still the ones who control the budget, the tools, and the connections in order for it to be really helpful, especially in times of crisis, because you don't want it to be like of still propagating the same power relations, because the decision has come from the outside, and we don't like that. So what I'm trying to say is, when you establish local mechanisms for relief, especially in life-saving times, you want it to be as fast as possible. And I don't know if that answers your question, but in our context, that's the way that I sort of interpreted and appreciated your question on rights claiming as well.
I can jump in, and of course I'll be a bit biased here as being part of our network, and I think that's something that resonated with me in this past year. With this funding crisis happened, we organized several conversations with funders here in Brazil. Just to give an example, and one of the goals of those conversations was for funders to step up, to join us, to understand the how serious the situation we're facing is right now, and that did not happen. Who stepped up and kept alongside us was the network members, were our partners, such as the Giving for Change partners, and people that were already part of our community, right? Those are the organizations that they are stepping up. They have always been. So here in Brazil, just to give you another example, with the former presidency of a right-wing government that we had, I think that was a moment that the Comoa really got together in designing responses and ways to resist and how to continue to strengthen civil society in such context. And we managed to overcome. The challenges, of course, are still there. We know that they will always be roaming around us and challenging us and attacking our rights, attacking the organizations that are leading the change. But we know that going back to our networks, going back to our communities is a movement forward. And something that we heard a lot last year was that, oh, networks are not strategic at this moment for funders. This is not a priority. Our priorities are income generation activities, our education. Of course, those are all important matters. But in a moment like this, it was the networks that helped us to get through it and to think of other ways to, like we were saying, to imagine other futures possible. So I think for me, the main message and the lesson that we learn is that, yes, the role of networks like Comoa, like the initiative that we had at the Global South House, with other networks, as a house of networks as well, I think it's a message for the sector that, yeah, we're still here, we're sticking together, even though you might not like it, even though you might not fund it, but we still have each other, we still have us. So I think this is what made us push through.
Yeah, I was listening so keenly, I forgot I need to chime in. I think in terms of sustainability, I've seen building power through mutual aid and collective care builds sustainability what people would call slower than just like getting a big chunk of funding, but it's still a way of building autonomy over time, which in the end becomes more sustainable than, getting funding and then uncertainty and then funding and then uncertainty. Getting external funding is okay, but just building that kind of autonomy over time alongside external help would be, greater sustainability for communities. And even when communities are not directly funding human rights, like, giving money so that these legal proceedings can go forward, even when let's say, even like what was said on the film, let's say a community is building a classroom or a small clinic, a dispensary or something. I think community investments like that do more to disrupt depoliticization. They're actually taking back political power. And even building that kind of collective slow power goes into building some sort of consciousness and autonomy over time, such that the community will reach a point where they can say, this money is going directly to the people in the community championing human rights, or going to, to the courts to take the government to court or something. It's just slow and steady, but it does get there. And even with the funding cuts, we saw that a lot of organizations in our context that rely heavily on external funding came to us for strategy support. Although we are like a super small collective with like super small community budgets, because also our resources fund emergencies, like they go back to the community as soon as we get them. They still came back to us for long-term strategy because they've seen that we've been building over time. It's been 5 years now. I mean, a bit over 5 years. So that kind of like slow, gradual building has led us to a moment where we might not hold resources to grant these communities in place of foreign aid, but we hold the knowledge to give them strategy that can go along the kind of applying that they're doing for their grants. So I think that sustainability is not exactly monetary sustainability, but it's a sustainability of consciousness that builds power. Thank you.
What another brilliant line. And I don't know if I took notes fast enough to try to summarize everything you've all said, but I'm going to make an attempt to bring us to a close. I think it's very interesting. Some of the themes that I've heard from all of you is that when we talk about foreign funding collapse, we tend to forget that foreign funding was never part of the survival equation for the majority of the world's human rights defenders. We know that the funding crisis is happening now, but it is not the first one, and it has not let us down. I really appreciate Jonathan's point about saying that this is not the first time that the funding system has let us down. And we know that traditional funders have often been unwilling to fund some of the very issues that drive communities with creativity, audacity, and the spirit of resistance. And we can back this up with some figures that I can sort of mention to the audience. We know that just between 2021 and 2023, well before this latest round of funding cuts, just $612 million went to human rights defenders, but international NGOs received the majority of that support at somewhere between 79 to 84% of it. Local NGOs get less than 16 to 21%, and this doesn't even get us to the stage where we're talking about local community leaders, indigenous groups, and actual movements. So what's more crucial and within this picture is that there's a huge amount of regional variation. We know that support for the Middle East and Asia has been declining for nearly a decade, despite escalating risks in those geographies. Some of the other crucial points that I took away from the panel, and I hope that this sounds organized, but it seems very clear to me that when we talk about community or philanthropy, or in fact even rights, that this is dynamic and multifaceted. Jonathan has used the example of saying we use the plural, we use the language of philanthropies and rights. That sense of belonging to a place or an idea or a way of practice shows up in many different ways across all of these contexts, but even within them. And so there are no magic bullets, and to work holistically on rights is to understand that social and economic rights are often tied to political ones, and that to meaningfully address any of this work is to do so carefully, relationally, and to think the way that we approach resources, think about that differently. I also quite like the image of slow and steady, and not thinking about sustainability of infrastructure of resources, but sustainability of consciousness. Because when we take a step back and we really reflect on the experiences that each of our panelists have shared, we might realize that we have a lot more than we think to begin to reimagine and redefine what is possible at times of crisis. One of the things that struck me is also how movements go unseen and how we understand the use of collective agency and voice. There's this fascinating tension in the discussion on the delicate balance between movements that don't wish to become known to the very forces that seek to dismantle them, and the reality that most systems do not fix themselves unless damage and the need for repair becomes visible. But in order for that damage to become visible, something or someone has to nudge that rupture into focus. And something that cuts across all of your interventions is about how we sit with that tension and the fact that authentic movements navigate this complexity and the daily decisions of finding that line that protects them and their communities by anchoring within and offering alignment as an antidote to a lack of trust. To refuse to normalize suffering is to design with our communities, not for them. And to imagine real change is also to think in a vocabulary of abundance. And I'm quoting Kitty again on this. I love this idea that love is a currency and that relationships are the basis of our operating systems. We're here, we're sticking together, even if you don't like it, even if you won't fund it, as Jonathan has put it. So on that note, I'm reminded of Audre Lorde's quote, where she says, the quality of the light by which we scrutinize our lives has direct bearing upon the product which we live and upon the changes which we hope to bring about through those lives. And I'd like to thank this panel again for shining a different light that might just help us re-examine how we understand the pursuit and the defense of rights today and how we can approach change for tomorrow. So please, thank you so much for your time and for your abundance in offering wonderful ideas and creative threads for us to all hold on to. And on that note, I wanted to introduce Wana Udubang, who I'm very excited to hear from today. She is a Nigerian writer, poet, performer, curator, and storyteller. She's released 3 spoken word albums, taking her across Africa, Europe, and North America with commissions from the Edinburgh International Festival, the Deutsche Museum, Fundus Suzyukulture, and Gates Foundation. She was awarded a Ford Foundation grant for her multimedia traveling exhibition, Dirty Laundry. We have the great fortune of having her join us today for a live performance of Hands and Clay. Wana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dina. It is very lovely to be joining you this afternoon and sharing this poem with you. I say it's pretty much an ode to the incredible work that everyone on this webinar has been doing and continues to do. And in many ways, a return to form of who we are and remembering and acknowledging as well. So I'm gonna go ahead now. Somewhere inside a small village, faces are screen printed on tapestry. They cling to branches, trees become walls. The village square is exhibition ground. They turn the profit to healthcare, and this is how a small village will keep their mothers alive. Ensure that sickness does not disembowel the guts of little children or turn the fate of their babies to cadaver. You see, where we come from, we know that a finger cannot push a stone, so we come together clenched as a fist. Somewhere inside a small city, seeds are sown into the soil, from burrowing into blooming. We beat the wheat from the germ, peel the husks and the skins, grind kernels to powder. As powder turns satza, we feast. Here, everybody is welcome. Our neighbors know no hunger. Our children are not effigies for aid campaigns. Here, one piece of land turns value chain. Here, we make a marketplace of our labor. Food is secure. We feed our people. Somewhere inside a country, technology is tutor. Algorithms turn curriculums, pencil and charcoal turn sentient beings. Here, we make stick figures dance. Make the inanimate animate, pour the knowledge down. This is energy in motion. We are a country who made a sport of a craft. We built an institution. Somewhere by the ocean's mouth, the tide is flinging the fish. A young girl gathers the troops, hands wrapped around scaly skin. They throw them back in. They battle the tide, repopulate the ocean, restore ecologies, give breath to the water to multiply. From Burkina to Brazil, Mexico to Mozambique, Palestine to Philippines, our communities have held their fate in the palms of their hands, molded the clay of their lives, baked them to bricks, stacked them and built monuments to cover our people. Indigenous legacies carved from the barks of trust, of empathy, of care. We redefine what it means to be the village, reimagine what it means to give back to our people, and in one singular act, we defy, become new patterns, write new stories, challenge histories. We transform each village, each town, each city, each country, become the custodians of knowledge, of leadership, of resources. We are sky and sea. We animate the dreams of our children, and even when the world as we know it crumbles, we fight. We fight for a future and a freedom for all. We shift the power, turn it to hashtags, turn the hashtags into movements, tilt it off its axis. We make us human again, community again, center again. Thank you.
Wow, just when I thought I couldn't love your poem anymore, I get the great privilege of seeing you perform it live. One of that is truly inspirational, and it's the sort of manifestation of energy that I personally want to be carrying into this year that's already starting off with difficulty for so many of us. I have so many questions I want to ask you, and I especially love the idea of communities holding the fate in the palms of their hands and molding the clay of their lives and baking them into bricks. And I wanted to ask you why you chose the imagery of bricks instead of something more fluid or more ephemeral. I'm very curious about your creative process in conveying that image of monuments.
I think when I kind of think back about us as a people, there's often been labor, right? There's often been physical labor, whether it's with our connection with the land and with ecologies, and it's always been very tactile. Whether we're working with and communities across the world, whether we're working with trees, whether we're working with the land, whether we're working with soil, it's always been very physical things that we can feel and we can touch. And we were always building things. What it meant to care was building physical infrastructure, homes for our families to live in, food. We go to the farm to till the soil for food to cook. And I think for me, just thinking about the elemental nature of it, not just the ephemeral nature, but really going back to the elements and how we work with the land and the earth to build and to care for ourselves. And to care is really to take everything around us to look after each other.
Absolutely gorgeous. Thank you again. I am so inspired and so humbled to be able to witness this live. I look forward to a point of us meeting off screen
Yes.
so that I hear it in the same room. I can imagine it will be delivered with even greater power. So with that inspirational interlude, now we are going to watch the trailers for 3 films from the Stories of Change project that showcase different contexts, approaches, and perspectives on community philanthropy. As I've already said at the start of the session, these are very short tasters, and we encourage you to watch the full films, which went live today on the festival's website after this session, and over to the webinar team to start these movies.
Change doesn't arrive with noise. It begins quietly. hawaasa mariisisuudhaan lafa kana gubbaarra dhaabannee haala gaariidhaan bifa gaariidhaan qophiin kun hirmaannaa hawaasaa bifa bareedaadhaan akka inni ijaaramee oolmaa dargaggootaatiif oolu taasisneerra jechuudha.
The community of practice has shown that communities, through their own initiative and collective strength, can solve the challenges they face and meet their own needs. This is the power of community.
There are times when the ground seems to vanish beneath our feet, when even the sky feels divided. We have learned that giving is not charity, it is survival. Because true sustainability is not a project, it's a way of being together. This is what it means to give for change.
Esse é um vlog do projeto de videomapping para Casa Sul Global. Quem assina esse projeto criativo junto às várias redes de filantropia sou eu, Vijay Artigma, e Vijay Morgana. A gente apresentou aqui uma leitura visual sobre território, justiça climática e filantropia.
A intervenção quando a luz enraiza tem como objetivo tornar ainda mais visível, dentro e fora, aquilo que já pulsa nos territórios: criatividade e reinvenção coletiva. Que esse trabalho possa instigar novos imaginários sobre o presente e os futuros que queremos.
Sorry, everyone. I had some technical difficulties. This is wonderful again, and as I said, short samples. You can watch the full videos on the website. There's a lot to unpack, and I'm also sort of going back to this language of abundance and each of us carrying a calling and a responsibility to think about how we're deploying our love to reference the panel earlier. And Jonathan, we still have you here, so I wanted to come back to you to tell us a little bit more about the Brazil film and the Kumoa Network, as well as the work at the Global South House. We'd love to hear a little bit more about this project.
Yes, thank you, Gina. Yeah, it's also very meaningful to be sharing this with you all finally. We wanted to create like a different experience for this project and take the opportunity that we'll be all there together in Belém at COP30. Like I mentioned before, 40 social environmental justice funds from the Global South together, and to create this immersive, this different experience on how to tell and share the stories of transformation that we see in our territories. And I think it was very also interesting to have that moment during the moment of celebration as well. It was during the cocktail moment, the party moment, in which we were able also to create this immersive experience, and people really felt connected to what they were seeing there. I think also having this opportunity to create these projections outside of the house itself, on the trees, I think it was also a way for us to make this call to action for the city and for the ones that were there in Belém, talking about the future, talking about climate change, climate justice, and to make our voices and messages very clear. I would like to wrap up. I'd like to thank the team of Komuá, Gugu, Jazz, of course the VJs, Morgana, Kawe, who are they are from Belém, they are from Pará, sorry. So it was great to work with them in this process, and to thank the Global South House team as well that accepted to join us in this journey. And we look forward to creating other experiences such as this one in other spaces with you all.
Thank you so much. I have been attending many climate conferences and climate COPs, and Brazil was one I missed, and I'm very sad about it, primarily because I didn't get to see your work in person and be energized by it. But thank you again for sharing this experience with all of us. And now to stay on Brazil and to turn the spotlight to SESI, we have Vanessa Pugliazzi and Rosana Fernandez from SESI, who will tell us about the work, about rights claiming, local resources, and challenges for community philanthropy. Vanessa is a community educator with extensive experience on urban planning. Rosana is a historian specializing in public policy management in gender and race, as well as an activist in the Black movement. They are both advisors in the project and training sector at SESI. Now I'll ask the webinar team to show us the video, and then we'll hand the floor to Vanessa and Rosana for some insights.
Marchar é esperançar, esperança é ação. Marchemos.
Por justiça econômica, justiça reprodutiva, pelo fim da fome e pela ocupação dos espaços das mulheres negras no nosso país.
E estamos aqui nessa marcha em Brasília com 30 mulheres que fazem parte de um coletivo de instituições, Mulheres em Marcha, Corpos, Vozes e Movimento, e que foi apoiado pela SESI.
Um grande legado da marcha é o fortalecimento das organizações das mulheres negras, do movimento de mulheres negras.
Bom dia e boa tarde a todas as pessoas, né? Um grande abraço aqui nosso do Brasil. E para começar, eu queria dar um forte abraço, né, nos companheiros de parceria da rede como a do qual a gente faz parte. E sob as bênçãos de Oxalá, ou do Senhor do Bonfim, o, né, dessa energia forte que cada um pode trazer em si de esperança, né, para o mundo, é que hoje aqui em Salvador é um dia onde se comemora, né, o padroeiro da nossa cidade. E ele é conhecido como Oxalá. Então é da paz, das bênçãos, da tranquilidade. E é sobre essa inspiração que a gente vai falar aqui um pouquinho, né, desse projeto, dessa iniciativa que nós tivemos. Então, eu gostaria de resgatar aqui um pouco, né, desse contexto que os companheiros que nos antecederam trouxeram, né? Esse contexto mundial de crescimento e fortalecimento da extrema-direita, do fascismo, conservadorismo, racismo, sexismo e de enfrentamento, né, que nós temos tido nesse capitalismo louco, né, que nos faz morrer, que nos faz, né, viver em condições indignas. E aí a gente quer, né, convidar vocês agora a escutar e refletir sobre uma história de mudança, né? E vocês já viram um pouco aí sobre o nosso podcast, nosso videozinho que fala sobre a marcha, Mulheres Negras em Marcha, Construindo o Bem Viver. Vamos começar lembrando também que essa história não nasce com a SESI, não nasce, né, nesse projeto. É uma história vivida por diversas organizações de mulheres negras no Brasil, das quais a SESI é uma apoiadora. Vamos, lembrar que somos também, né, da Rede Como Ar. Então, a gente trabalha, né, nesse ajuntamento, não sei nem como vai ser traduzido isso, mas esse ajuntamento, né, de fortalecimento que Jonathan, inclusive, trouxe, né, nos apoiando, nos fortalecimento. A gente vai contar sobre essa organização de mulheres negras. Então, a primeira questão que eu vou convidar para vocês, né, é sobre como o movimento de mulheres negras brasileiras tem reivindicado direitos a partir, né, de recursos comunitários, a partir dessa mobilização de recursos locais. Como a Marcha das Mulheres Negras tem colaborado com isso. Então, nossa história, né, como toda história, se desenvolve em um certo cenário, que eu já trouxe, né, um pouco desse contexto mundial, mas também ela se desenvolve em um território, né? Ela tem personagens, ela tem conflitos, ela tem desafios e também tem uma resolução, ela tem um desfecho, né? Ela tem aprendizados. Como toda história, ela tem começo, meio e fim. Mas a nossa história, ela segue por um caminho que tem começo, meio e começo, porque a gente vai, né, em uma roda girando, a gente vai se alimentando e a gente vai, né, construindo. Eu queria também dizer que ao final de toda a história, né, gera um novo começo, né, a partir desses aprendizados. Então, toda história precisa de bons personagens, né? A personagem principal dessa história que a gente vai trazer para você aqui são as histórias das organizações do movimento de mulheres negras no Brasil, né? Composta por uma diversidade de mulheres, que são mulheres do campo, são mulheres da cidade, são mulheres de religiosidade afro-brasileira, são de artistas, são de comunicadoras, gente está aí, né? São de acadêmica, de jovens, anciãs, então é uma diversidade, né, de mulheres, né? E também de diversas orientações sexuais, né? E também das companheiras, né, que lutam pelo direito à acessibilidade. Então, quem é essa mulher negra como sujeito político? É um sujeito político muito diverso, que constrói uma narrativa de emancipação, autonomia e de direitos humanos, né? Outros personagens também acabam fazendo parte da história, né? Como outros movimentos sociais que são engajados na luta por direitos, o governo, né? O poder público, que às vezes reconhece as lutas e implantam importantes políticas públicas, né? De equidade racial e de gênero, mas que, de outro lado, não conseguem fazer as mudanças estruturais e uma sociedade que também é racista e preconceituosa. O cenário onde essa história se desenvolve é aqui no Brasil, né, como a gente estava falando. É um país com muitas histórias de lutas e conflitos, atravessado por desigualdades históricas, raciais, de gênero e de classe, mas também por muitas histórias de resistência, de movimentos populares, da sociedade civil organizada e da conquista de direitos e de políticas públicas. E foi assim que nós viemos da África e chegamos aqui no Brasil, né? Construindo formas de resistência, formas de sobrevivência e formas de afirmação das nossas identidades, né? Muitos conflitos, muitos desafios acompanham nossa história de luta, né? Desses movimentos e dos movimentos de mulheres negras. A gente tem casos de racismo, de violência doméstica, sexual, contra mulheres e meninas negras, pouca representatividade destas mulheres em espaços de decisão, seja ela dentro do poder público, dos cargos de direção das organizações, né? Nos locais de trabalho, a gente sempre é que recebe os melhores salários, os menores salários, menores salários em comparação com mulheres brancas, com os homens brancos, inclusive com os homens negros, né? A insegurança pública, a intolerância religiosa, genocídio, particularmente da juventude negra, a violência policial, né? São a questões de saneamento básico, ameaças aos modos de vida das comunidades que são tradicionais, enfim, ao impacto ambiental, climático. E dentro desse aspecto, a gente somos nós, as mulheres negras, que assumimos a responsabilidade exclusiva pelas famílias, né? Criamos os filhos, muitas vezes sozinhas, somos a grande maioria das mulheres que são assassinadas, né, por feminicídio no país, mas por outro lado, né? Mas, ao lado ainda dessa situação de violência, também nós temos um processo de organização das mulheres, né, de resistência, de fortalecimento, cada vez mais no Brasil, das nossas organizações, das nossas redes, né? Então, desde o tempo da escravização dos povos africanos que viemos resistindo e aqui estamos, contando essa história para vocês, né? Se voltássemos nossa história um pouco no tempo, né, em 2015, em Brasília, aqui no Brasil, na nossa capital, ocorreu a primeira Marcha das Mulheres Negras, a marcha de um movimento nacional e internacional composto por redes e mulheres negras de diversos contextos. É um marco na garantia de direitos, né? E agora a gente já teve, em 2025, a segunda marcha, né? Que foi realizada em novembro do ano passado, né? Abordando o combate ao racismo, à violência, a reparação histórica e a promoção do bem viver. O conceito de bem viver, presente na cosmovisão dos povos indígenas e quilombola, nos ensina outras formas de relacionamento com o planeta Terra, com a comunidade e com o nosso território. A iniciativa contou com a participação de mulheres e organização de diversos países da América Latina, da África, dos Estados Unidos, da Europa, assim como mobilizou apoio de diversas agências, fundações, etc. E aí eu vou chamar minha colega Vanessa.
Bom, boa tarde também aqui. E como eu sei que nós não estamos contando histórias ao redor da fogueira, como algumas de vocês fizeram no encontro de parceiros em Uganda, isso foi o que eu soube, então acho que eu vou ter que acelerar um pouquinho, né, uma parte da nossa história, né? Mas é importante pensar também, trazer e contar histórias de algumas estratégias que essas mulheres têm feito e tem usado para vivenciar, né, toda essa experiência da marcha e também da luta das mulheres negras no Brasil, né? Que é uma jornada que tem um processo organizacional e metodológico muito único, né? Alguns recursos foram arrecadados por meio de financiamento coletivo, organizando desde festas tradicionais, como feijoada, eventos de samba, jogos, feiras, shows, e utilizando as tecnologias que as mulheres negras possuem e aplicam em seus territórios e comunidades, né? Muitas dessas experiências, inclusive, apoiadas pela SESI através do programa do APA Transformado do Game for Change. E isso possibilitou um processo de mobilização muito poderoso, que deu início a um processo contínuo de treinamento, e isso é fundamental, né, esse processo de continuidade, pois a marcha teve como objetivo mobilizar, manter a influência política e também capacitar. E nesse momento é fundamental a utilização que elas fizeram de outros recursos comunitários, que não apenas os financeiros, né? Envolvendo dimensões como pertencimento, participação, poder, voz ativa, tempo. E alguns, para citar alguns exemplos, né, tivemos a criação de comitês locais autônomos como estratégia da marcha, o que alcançou diferentes mulheres no Brasil, né, que tem um território gigantesco. A sustentação do sentido de coletivo e de pertencimento dessas mulheres, né? com articulação permanente em redes mais amplas, a participação em espaços de decisão com outros atores de influência, a formação contínua com as mulheres e pelas mulheres sobre as pautas e demandas de políticas públicas da marcha, esse reconhecimento também do movimento enquanto uma força política importante no país, e tendo maior visibilidade, né, junto a tomadores de decisão, e um ponto muito importante que é a autonomia, né, a manutenção da autonomia do movimento e do protagonismo dessas mulheres no ecoar de suas próprias vozes. E são estratégias que também, de alguma forma, se relacionam muito com os próprios princípios da filantropia comunitária, ainda que muitos movimentos não utilizem esse termo, né? Então, a liderança, a perspectiva de cidadania e de solidariedade, as abordagens de direitos inclusivas, os próprios recursos comunitários, para além do recurso financeiro, né, são elementos que estão presentes nessas estratégias, né? Ou seja, né, buscando transformação. E essa história também deixa aprendizados e legados, né? Ela reverberou e ela continua reverberando né, nesse processo, né? Então, a gente vai falar pequenos aprendizados, vamos puxar 4 fios dessa história, né? Da imaginação radical, das práticas de aquilombamento, dos diálogos transnacionais e dos espaços de poder, né? E o primeiro deles é essa imaginação radical, né? Jonathan estava aí há pouco, né, falando também da imaginação, né? E nessa imaginação radical, a gente tem essa luta das mulheres negras por um outro projeto político para o Brasil, né? E não para um movimento, não para um segmento, né? É um projeto centrado no bem viver, como esse contraponto ao capitalismo, ao racismo, à violência de gênero, a todas as formas de opressão, né? Então, a partir dessa experiência de territórios negros, de territórios indígenas, e que abrange uma diversidade, tanto do que significa ser uma mulher negra, mas também um projeto mais amplo de sociedade, né? Dentro de um processo de organização que não começou agora, né? Que é histórico, é coletivo, é ancestral, de luta pela liberdade, mas que pensa, né, a partir de um olhar diferente da sociedade através das relações comunitárias, né? E esse papel vem sendo remodulado na atualidade, né, através de lutas contemporâneas, nessa perspectiva também de mudanças paradigmáticas, grandes mudanças em relação também sobre a própria vida e os modos de viver, né? Então, essa expansão da agenda no movimento vai também para outras lutas, como educação, moradia, saúde, justiça climática, soberania alimentar, proteção de defensoras, né? Extermínio da juventude negra, direitos de mulheres LGBTQIA+, né? Tudo isso para pensar esse Brasil de uma forma diferente, né? Um outro projeto de país, né? Então, que é usar essa imaginação radical, é administrar o impossível, né? E pensar, quem sabe, até para além da democracia, né? Pensando em outros sistemas e formas de viver. E aí eu passo para a Rosana um outro fio. Rota aí ou saiu?
Tô aqui, tô aqui. Então, aí a gente tem, né, como o aprendizado, o legado, né, dessa história construída de muitas mãos, muitas cabeças, muitos corpos, muita força, muita energia. Um aprendizado são as práticas de acampamento, né? Que é essa atuação em rede, essa questão da autonomia e território, né? A marcha, que é de forma coletiva, né, e autônomo, se consolidou como um movimento nacional, né, com impacto político significativo. Mas essa força provém também da articulação entre o local e o nacional, né, do trabalho realizado por organizações de mulheres negras em cada território, em cada local, né, de moradia, de trabalho, de articulação política. Dessa forma, devemos pensar que não foram somente as 300 mil mulheres que estiveram na capital do país reivindicando direitos, né? A gente deve pensar nas centenas de mulheres que construíram, que se aquilombaram, que se reuniram, que dialogaram, que fizeram formação, Então, são milhões de pessoas que estiveram envolvidas nessa proposta. Então, a quilombar, ela descreve essa prática de resistência e existência coletiva, derivada da palavra quilombo. A quilombar vem da palavra quilombo, que é um espaço de liberdade e de refúgio de pessoas escravizadas afro-brasileiras, fugitivas ou libertas, né? Vamos pensar no período histórico. Dos quilombos históricos, as formas contemporâneas de organização coletiva entre as mulheres negras, o aquilombar é uma prática e estratégia para a construção de futuros possíveis. Podemos dizer ainda que o número de coletivos, de organizações, grupos que se organizam e se coordenam na luta contra o racismo patriarcal cresceu 90% e ganhou maior poder de visibilidade e expressão. Mulheres negras criaram e continuam criando organizações contemporâneas que não são mais apenas associações comunitárias, mas que assumiram uma dimensão coletiva maior, lutando batalhas amplas. Hoje não há lugar nenhum do país, no Brasil, onde não se encontre mulheres negras organizadas, lutando por políticas de equidade, pelo território e denunciando a violência. Tudo isso é a luta por direitos humanos. Isso também é legado no processo de organização da marcha. É a metodologia e o processo que fazem da marcha o que ela é, e não a marcha em si. É esse processo, né, de movimento, de articulação, que é o aprendizado que a gente está trazendo aqui. Mas diga aí, Vanessa, um
Um
pouco aí.
outro aprendizado são esses diálogos transnacionais, né? De mulheres negras por bem viver e cooperação, né? Como é que se constrói esse legado de ideia de mulheres negras em âmbito transnacional, né? De aprendizado juntas, como avançar para o bem viver, né? Que não seja só no território brasileiro, né? Então, a marcha tem fortalecido nos últimos anos esses diálogos transnacionais com mulheres de diversas partes do mundo, africanas, afro-europeias, afro-latino-americanas, afro-norte-americanas, de várias origens, porque tanto a pauta da reparação quanto do bem viver são elementos que forjam essa situação em que essas mulheres negras vivenciam em qualquer lugar do mundo. E aí é importante lembrar, né, acho que na abertura pela manhã, na primeira sessão, a gente falou dos conflitos, né, e da guerra, e a gente tem um país também em disputa, né? A gente tem um continente em disputa na América Latina e a gente também tem um mundo com guerras crescentes, né? E a gente sempre gosta, e é sempre importante também lembrar que a guerra, na maioria das vezes, quando sempre é um instrumento masculino, né? Então, a gente também é importante lembrar que o movimento de mulheres tem obtido também muito sucesso em denúncias internacionais de violação de direitos humanos, né? Sendo não mais a pessoa impactada só pela violência, mas o sujeito protagonista da própria denúncia, né? Crescendo também essa busca por agências de cooperação internacional, no debate também de uma interlocução mais direta com o próprio movimento, sem muitos intermediários, e também esse debate sobre a decolonização, né, que o movimento de mulheres negras não está fazendo agora, né, faz há muito tempo, mas que vem crescido, principalmente com os próprios desafios da cooperação, no último período. E aí eu passo para a Rosana fechar essa história, né, ou recomeçá-la, de novo nesse processo ali do começo, meio e começo.
Pois é, gente, a gente ainda tem mais um legado, um aprendizado para compartilhar com vocês, que são os espaços de poder na tomada de decisão, representação e políticas. A baixa representatividade de mulheres negras nos espaços de poder no Brasil é uma história já conhecida e que não gostaríamos de contar, fruto das desigualdades de raça, gênero e classe. Porém, nos últimos anos, essa participação se intensificou. A realização da marcha fortaleceu essa pauta. Cada vez mais mulheres negras passaram a apresentar candidaturas nos processos eleitorais, na disputa por representação legislativa, em busca de decidir sobre políticas de equidade mais eficazes de contribuir para mudar a vida de muitas outras pessoas. A campanha nacional, que é um exemplo que a gente traz concreto,
Thank you so much, Rosanna and Vanessa. This is really inspirational and so much context that you have provided us. I'm conscious of time and I want to hand over the floor to Milagre for the
Estamos
Mozambique
concluindo,
case
Dina.
study to see some of the great connections
Minuto.
to see some of the connections
Sim,
between the
minuto. A campanha nacional Vote Negra, que foi realizada pelo Movimento de Mulheres Negras, é um exemplo disso, que era a disputa eleitoral. No entanto, a gente quer dizer que, com forte ação de comunicação, além de formação política, pesquisa, né, fortaleceu todo esse movimento. Porém, nossa história é preciso refletir sobre o espaço de tomada de decisão e de poder, que já foi falado aqui. De que poder estamos falando? O que é poder? De fato, em um contexto em um país como o Brasil, o que é poder? E é assim que não termina a nossa história, porque essa história não tem fim, ela continua com novos começos e um movimento contínuo. Como disse uma das companheiras, né? Nossa daqui, que inclusive está no podcast, não perder de vista o futuro. Por isso que ela não tem fim. E vamos convidar vocês para assistir, né, o podcast Mulheres Negras em Marcha Construindo um Bom Viver. Muito obrigado pela paciência de nos escutar.
Thank you so much, Rosanna, and thank you for that excellent point on the beginning and the end and the way in which these stories connect across time and space. I'd like to switch a little bit to our Mozambique spotlight, and I'm delighted to welcome Milagre Novungo, who is the executive director and co-founder of Mikea, a hybrid entity comprising a Mozambican foundation and a social enterprise. Mikea works to support community strategies and actions to achieve well-being, including advocating for the recognition and growth of community philanthropy. Now, first we'll show a flame rekindled, and then the floor will be with Milagre to tell us a little bit about the work and experiences in Mozambique.
Em muitas das comunidades de Moçambique, a prática de ajudar, apoiar e resolver juntos já existia há muitos anos. A partir desse reconhecimento, o que antes eram iniciativas isoladas tornou-se um movimento com identidade. Hoje as comunidades não apenas participam, lideram.
A filantropia comunitária, ela, uma vez reconhecida, ela dá voz, dá força.
Floor is yours, Milagre.
Thank you, Dina, and thank you, everybody, for being with us now. I know it has been a very, very rich day of conversations around community philanthropy, and being the last, I have the privilege of not saying much because so much has been shared, so much, we have a lot of questions also in our Q&A. What I would like to share just now in very few minutes is just to stress a few things that some of which come in the video, some is just there because it is part of everything we've been talking about today. And I wanted to start with by just highlighting a few things that I retained from this morning and also earlier today, this afternoon. The fact that we're talking and discussing about love, empathy, and solidarity as currencies. And I think that's really important when we're talking about community philanthropy, because through that, we are trying also to rebuild this sense of humanity, our own humanity, that very often is lost in the various processes of life in a community, in a country, or just in this world. And so looking at that as a foundation of all the conversations and actions we are taking within our own lives and communities, and also seeing how this reclaiming this humanity helps us then, or pushes us to build relationships with one another, and how through that relationship, feeling that we're not alone, we can then create this sense of hope, and again, and through that, as people with specific identities, we feel as if we belong somewhere, we belong to a specific communities, and that gives us a sense of purpose and possibility. And that, in fact, unlocks what was being said here as imagination. And it's through that we can reimagine a new world, a new reality, and work for that with this stronger sense of possibility. Because and what I also wanted to highlight is how through this process we create a space for listening, something that has been mentioned over and over again through this festival. How through that listening we identify the different voices within the community. We very often say that community philanthropy helps us build a voice, but that voice that we talk about comes from first identifying the differences in the voices that are within our communities, and many of those have had space in this festival today. So listening to all of those voices that together and uniting those voices builds this sense of a collective, and through that building this collective agency again, which can be transformed into a power to advocate for our own rights, rights as human beings, rights as individuals, rights as communities. And so for me, all of this, even the small and bigger actions that come, which can come in many ways, of building an identity, building a school, building whatever it may be, whatever action, or if it's a sporting event, if it's a cultural event, whatever might be fit for purpose in that particular context, which can bring us together to listen to each other, to build together the new reality that we want. And so this is what I wanted to just put on the table once again as something that through small actions that we can actually recognize each other, recognize our power, and a power even to advocate for whatever rights that we may have that are critical to that sense of being human with rights. And so I'll stop there right now, because it will be good to interact just through the questions that our participants have put forward.
That is incredibly eloquent and, as always, inspirational in your intervention, even if sweet and short. It's captured a lot of the different themes that we've discussed today. So thank you again to our Brazilian and Mozambican colleagues for such excellent interventions. And as Milagre has already suggested, we want to bring this discussion together for some shared reflections, as well as to try to answer some of the questions from the audience. One of the things that strikes me in both both of your spotlights, both from Brazil and Mozambique, is again this emphasis on distinction and difference within the communities that you work with. I really like your reference, Milagre, to this being a space for listening, and that difference, and rather than forcing cohesion, is actually the way that we begin to really understand what it means for us to work through this lens, through this system of being. And Vanessa also made the same point that many of the partners that you work with don't use this language on community philanthropy. So I'd like to invite all our speakers from this webinar to come on, turn on your cameras, and we'll kick off this conversation with some questions. I don't know if you'd like to choose the questions from the Q&A or if I can just decide who to pick on once again.
Dina, so there are some questions for Vanessa on the Q&A, so maybe.
Yes, there are a few questions for Vanessa, and so Vanessa or Rosanna. I think one of the questions that I thought was really striking was how we coordinate beyond Brazil. What communication strategies do you make use of to connect beyond Brazil, and how do women from other countries come to Brazil for those that can't travel, but they want to be included in your movement?
A gente vai responder cada uma ou vai fazer um bloco de perguntas?
Que pode responder, Rosana.
Eu posso responder, Rô. Porque acho que assim, nesse caso foi Kelly, né, que perguntou, fez essa pergunta, um pouco mais direcionada, mas a gente não coordena, né, esse processo no Brasil, né? A gente não coordena o movimento de mulheres negras nem o processo da marcha, né? Então, a SESI é uma apoiadora e a marcha tem seus próprios comitês organizativos do movimento de mulheres negras no Brasil. Então, o que a gente sabe em relação a essa pergunta, na relação com mulheres de outros países, é que existe um trabalho que vem sendo fortalecido nos últimos anos de mulheres, do movimento de mulheres negras, das redes de mulheres negras no Brasil, se articulando tanto virtualmente com mulheres de outros países, mas também presencialmente, assim, muito forte, participando de muitos espaços de discussão de equidade de gênero, mas também de equidade racial, de combate ao racismo em outros países, junto com outras mulheres, né? Então, esse processo vem sendo construído aos poucos, mas tem tido muita participação de mulheres negras brasileiras, de movimentos sociais em outros países, já fazendo essa articulação presencialmente, né? Muito forte. Mas é o que a gente sabe, né? Porque não somos nós que coordenamos diretamente isso. Ró, você quer complementar?
Eu vou colocar um link aí que vocês podem visitar a página, vou colocar aí no chat, a página que tem, né, as formas de interação e de articulação. Eu acho só importante dizer, acrescentar, que a marcha ela é autônoma, né? As mulheres das organizações participam, né? Nós apoiamos essas mulheres, né, nesse envolvimento, nessa construção, né, tanto financiando, né, com apoio do programa, né, as iniciativas dela, como também fazendo formação, cursos de como mobilizar recursos, né, de como trabalhar a comunicação. Então, a forma de apoio nosso foi de reforço, né, para diversas iniciativas que o DOAR, né, oportunizou para elas. Então, fizemos diálogos, né, sobre a marcha, fizemos podcast, então comunicação, divulgando, mas também fazendo capacitação, né, em diversas iniciativas e apoio também a projetos.
Thank you both. I'm conscious of time, so I want to pose an expansive question for each of you to tackle, maybe in a minute each, so that we bring the session to a close. And it is a bridge of multiple questions that are in a Q&A and a bridge of the themes across today's session. But we've talked a lot today about this renewed pressure as the system crumbles, the system collapses, and a lot of these mainstream spaces where they're talking more and more about writing checks to building systems. And to close this session, the question I'd like each of you to speak to is how much can community philanthropy teach the rest of the world about how we can deepen commitments to transparency, equity, and trust, and to re-examine where the center of gravity is assumed. We also have a question about the advice that you could provide to other local organizations in other regions that might be looking to build a local culture of giving for rights and justice. What are practical strategies, especially in terms of communication? And then I'm bridging this with another question from the Q&A session that is really asking us to reflect on how do we work in ways that protect and encourage individuals in contexts where there are major risks of punishment, backlash, arrest, and perhaps even death for supporting those rights. So we can go by order on my screen. Maybe Milagri, you can kick us off with a minute each, and then we can go around the panel.
I wanted to thank Rosanna for sharing the link, but what I also wanted to highlight is the importance of context, because there may be several approaches through media, through other means, but context matters. What works for Brazil, given the historical or political context, might not work for Mozambique or might not work for any other country. So I think that will be my first point. But also, it's we all live different. We have different socioeconomic. We are in different stages of socioeconomic development, or even facing different challenges. And so, depending on what it is, and depending on what exactly that community might need or want to prioritize and to address, then at any given moment the approaches will be different, because they have to be cognizant of that. Because in some cases people can be more open, but in others they will have to use different and more sophisticated ways of getting to their own objectives. And so I don't think there's a direct question, a direct answer to say this is what you do if you want to achieve A, B, or C, because it physically might be impossible, or even for other means. So I think that's important. But I would still go back to the issue of building trust and solidarity as the common currency that goes across this, because nobody can do this. We cannot do this by ourselves, and we need to build these bridges, these networks that may take different shapes and sizes given the context, but they are still the main currency that we need to be able to achieve our objectives.
Yeah, Dina. Yeah, I think it's hard to cover all those questions in 1 minute, but I think a key move for us here at Comoa was also a process to look back on the experiences that we have here at the network. Like I mentioned, we have so many members celebrating 20 years, 50 years, like Cesar recently, who have been doing this work even since the dictatorship years here in Brazil. And when we look at the sector now, there are so many buzzwords, right? Like trust-based philanthropy, collaborative funds, and so many new names and and terms for things that actually the communities have been doing for a very long time. Maybe with not the name that we are using here, like community philanthropy, like it was mentioned here, there are some other terms and names for what the communities have been doing. But I think this process of looking back might surprise us in showing that, yeah, maybe the giving culture, sometimes it's imposed to us, like the giving should look like this. Maybe it doesn't happen necessarily that way in the communities that we work with. I also always remember Barry in the Measuring What Matters group saying that when they were talking about monitoring evaluation systems in communities, they found out the secret spreadsheets that actually many of those communities were doing monitoring and evaluation, maybe not in the way that the traditional system was telling them to do, but they were doing it. So I think it's a process of taking this step back, looking inwards and in conversation with communities and so on. And very quickly on on communications, I think an experience that we've been having here at Comuá is to build collective communications strategy. So we have a community of practices with communicators from different member organizations. We have a small working group with some members as well. And the experience that we've been having a lot is, of course, always hard to get our messages across, especially in more traditional media. But when we get together and decide to draft articles, op-eds, reflections, or produce materials such as this video mapping that you saw earlier today, those are the moments that we manage to find some space and make our voices heard. So I think this process of writing together, I know it takes time. It's not always easy with the busy schedules and things that we have to do, but it's a way forward that we've been seeing and has been helping us a lot with our communications strategy. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here with you all and to learn with you all as well. Thank you, Dina, for the
Thank you so
moderation.
much, Jonas. Kedi, I'm coming to you next.
Thank you, Dina. I think I can end by maybe affirming that local resources don't necessarily have to replace global solidarity, and that it's not one or the other. It's something that can strengthen local communities side by side. And it's also just about resisting an economic model that's supposed to keep oppressed people in need. And also you've seen how weak it is as much as it positions itself as the center of power, it can crumble at any moment. So also shifting that narrative is kind of like shifting power, where we can understand even things that we deem as centers of power can crumble at any time, but our communities, as small as they're deemed, are always the things that we turn back to, and they're always the things that remain, I hate this word, but yes, resilient. And just to go back to language, I think the other panelists have also talked a lot about reclaiming language and also resisting the urge to adhere to these new definitions of the buzzwords that go around. So I just feel like it's also important to say that global solidarity is important even when we are looking at ways at scaling local resourcing. Thank you.
Absolutely beautiful. So many things to quote, Kedi again. Rosanna, I'll come to you.
Bom, eu queria agradecer, e se for o caso, eu acho que a gente vai continuar, né? E eu penso que a gente deve continuar no diálogo, né? De outras formas, com recurso, sem recurso, mas eu acho importante essa solidariedade. E eu acho que é importante muito, 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 é a gente se enxergar, né, entre nós como parceiro, com solidariedade e com força para transformar, né? Eu acho que é isso que nos move, né? É a gente ter a energia renovada a cada depoimento, a cada fala e a cada ação que nós desenvolvemos em cada país, em cada território. Então, eu desejo que 2026, né, que está começando agora, seja a continuidade dessa história de resistência, de força e de luta, né? Para que a gente consiga transformar o nosso mundo. Um abraço para todo mundo e obrigado.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. Vanessa.
Só agradecer também participação, foi uma escuta muito rica desde da manhã, né, do início da manhã. Saímos com vontade, acho que, de mais trocas, né? Acho que conhecer mais sobre a experiência de outras organizações em outros países é sempre motivador para a gente, né? Tanto nos aprendizados, mas também no que não deu certo, né? Acho que é importante também a gente conversar sobre o que não está dando certo. E acho que é interessante que acho que eu escutei muitas coisas de manhã relacionadas a um pouco, acho que o que alguém falou aqui, não sei se foi nessa mesa ou na outra, também sobre a gente ultrapassar essas dicotomias, né? Se a gente faz uma coisa, não faz a outra, né? É, os grupos que fazem ações de filantropia não vão reivindicar direitos, então acho que todas as falas aqui desde a manhã trazem essas possibilidades também conectadas, né? Entre elas, acho que também isso é muito interessante.
Thank you, and very, very valuable reminder again on the binaries that hold us into mental traps and don't reflect reality. Mike, I'll come to you, and then I'll wrap up this session with tremendous gratitude and just joy to be in your company.
Thank you so much, Dina. So I'd like to also reiterate what Jonathan was really saying is like the persistence in our communities. Most of the communities that we work with, they're volunteer based, and they still stay after 30 years and 40 years without needing so much financial support. And so we must hone that energy. And I think in our society, in our context, it is very much alive. Even during the pandemic, it was seen through the ways by which people wanted to come forward and help each other. An activist started a community pantry in one of our communities where people actually put goods up for grabs for everybody, where they could take and then supplant it with another one or replace it with another one. They could just take what is enough for them and they could replace with whatever they don't need. And that, to me, was a beautiful reimagining of a system where people are accountable to each other, not for a system outside of their community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant once again. And so it seems we're all saying that relationship building is key to shifting loyalty. And when our work is rooted, when it's place-based, it's driven by context, local innovations and solutions can drive the systemic change that we desperately need. I'd like to thank everyone who has participated in today's session and for this really beautiful and welcome reminder that there can be multiple centers of gravity and not a singular theory of change to govern the world. It is possible now and not in a distant future to trust people to make decisions about their own lives and to experiment with ways of relating to each other on our planet. And Mike, I really like your framing on accountability to each other. That I think was an excellent note for us to close on. So I'll quote Tessa McQuat and say thank you once again, and to echo her line that the single most powerful tool we have is our language and its ability to reinvent realities. I feel really humbled and honored to have spent the last 2 hours with all of you in desiring a new language of belonging, or a who are you space to gather in with others. And thank you as well to our very patient audience for their active participation. Please let's continue the conversation by following the project's website and exploring the films which have premiered today. I know that we have a video in closing that you can watch. And of course, thank you again and to all the panelists and to Lana, who I believe we may have lost, for their time and for their incredible insights and inspiration.
Community philanthropy is Ubuntu, recognizing and celebrating one's strength, and also that jointly we are more powerful than we are as individuals.
Community philanthropy is basically people taking their fate into their own hands, people exercising sovereignty, exercising agency, and it is the antithesis of dependency and waiting for somebody else to do.
For me, community philanthropy feels like it's both a thing to do and a way of life.
I think it's something that my parents and grandparents have practiced all their lives.
In the African culture, they say a child is not brought up by a family by itself, but is brought up by a village of people.
Community philanthropy to me is the core of who we are as people.
Is about accompanying communities on their journey.
Community philanthropy for me is the assets, the resources, the knowledge, the leadership, which is grounded in the local situation, the local context, that we can use to advance our aspirations for development, humanitarian work, but also peace-building work.
And these resources could vary from money to things like time, labor.
Care, the support, the access to education and healthcare.
The advancement of technologies offers us an opportunity for learning, cross-learning from culture to culture and seeing what can actually work in the local context.
About 8 years ago, I witnessed a community launch an exhibition of photos taken from within the community to try and launch a fundraiser that would gather funds for them to try and construct a health center that would provide first-hand health support to mothers and young children. And there are countless examples of how communities have been able to mobilize local resources.
In the community that we grow up, no one lacks food. When we have guests, whether they come announced or unannounced, they are always welcome with a meal. And the society, the community always contribute to support each other.
And one example was about food security. The community came together and said, we do not want a single individual going to bed hungry. The Nkosis, the chiefs, the schools, the youth, the business people, unemployed, and they all came together and said, how can we go about it? Let us first look at what we have, the resources amongst ourselves, such as land, having vegetable gardens, taking these vegetables, processing them, taking them to the market. And in that way, the community actually created their own value chain.
We have a very, very impactful word for community philanthropy in our Palestinian culture, which is called al-auna. Al-auna means peer-given collective support that is void of power dynamics, that's given freely and willingly, and it's there to support and help and lift up.
The most powerful thing I've experienced in community philanthropy, although we would never have called it that, was basically in Kenya being able to create an animation industry out of nothing. This has happened in my lifetime. Without any external funding, we basically used online resources, reading from books, and the few people who were able to get exposures to create an animation industry. You know, having an animation association of people helping each other, because animation is a team sport, and we pay dues every year, and we're able to host things like the event International Animation Day, and we've basically been able to do this by ourselves, which I'm very proud of.
Can you hear us? My passion comes from someone who was walking by the beach, and there had been a tide the night before and fish were thrown off the ocean. He started walking and picking one fish at a time and throwing it back into the ocean. And someone asked him, you realize that there's 1,000 of these fish that already been thrown out. You may not be able to save all of them. But he bent down again and picked another piece of fish and pushed it back again into the ocean. I have changed the life of that one fish. And so for me, it's more about the changing, being able to change life of one community, one young girl, one boy, you know, just one individual within our community to have a better life.
You edit the areas?
Well, that was wonderful. I'm also just inspired by the music. Thank you again for joining us, and final round of applause for all the panelists. I hope you enjoy the rest of your days, whatever time zone you're based in. And Mike, good night. And anyone else who is heading off to bed, thank you so much for staying up for this inspirational conversation.
Thank you all. Obrigado.